Fun with him. So it's class. And so you have the upper class, and you're going to have slaves. And the thing about slaves, that's African-American slaves and American Indian slaves, they have fewer rights because they're not citizens, but they're still the underclass servants. And then you have free people who are free. People came there as free, but didn't have much. Servants who are now free with their head right. And slaves who are free when they got a head right or their children are slaves. And so we have a large group of people, and it's, this is multi-ethnic, multi-racial, it's all basically these people with a like interests. We have no political power, we're given bad land, we're being stifled by debt. It's always going to be debt, coming back to debt all the time. And they revolted and they almost won. The reason they lost is because fall came. What did a lot of them have to do when the fall came? They have no money. They're in debt. What did they got to do in the fall? Harvest. Yeah, they got to go harvest. And when that happened, the burgesses were able to buy out the poor who lived along the coast to fight the people in the interior, and they said they won. This will happen time after time. During the great strikes and upheaval of 1877, the robber baron, the great industrialist named Jay Gould, said during the massive strikes and almost revolution, he said, we should hire half the poor people to kill the other half so we can keep power. So this is not a new thing or an old thing. This is going to happen, this attitude, time after time. But is this the bad one? Well, that's a good one. What do you think? This one?
That one, the second one.
Keep going. So, I'm preparing something. There's a process here. This is all being filmed now. We're going live, people. Yesterday it didn't record. The camera, it's all 360, so it's all 3D. I have cameras all over. And the director is just out there. Behind the camera, right
Makes me feel like I'm a part of
Camera's over there.
What movie is it?
So, back to this. Now I forgot what I was talking about. Oh, okay. But you can imagine how the House of Burgesses is absolutely panicked. They can do the math. What if this happens again? And they rebel just a little bit earlier and win. We're outnumbered. This group here is almost all the population. We're talking about 97% of the population. They will win. The math is against them. By the way, that's why this country did not want to be a democracy. And that's why the United States is not a democracy. We'll talk more about that later. But they're really worried. And that is why they passed the slave codes. And the most important of the slave codes, the fornication laws. It's after Bacon's Rebellion, the fornication laws. Slavery is now permanent. And it assured, it gave legal rights, like to sit on a jury or to give testimony or to sue in civil court. It gave these legal rights, not all, they can't pick representatives. There's no voting as we know it for representatives. They gave legal rights to citizens. These people with contracts. Doesn't this fit in with the fornication laws? Those citizens also happen to be what color? So they're of European descent. Now, it wasn't automatic. I mean, in some areas, free blacks could have these rights. And in some areas, free blacks could vote well into the 1800s. Women could vote into the 1800s. And then the rights were taken away. If you think you have rights now, and see we have these rights and they'll never go away, no. It's happened time after time in history. Rights can go and rights can be taken away. I mean, the right for gay marriage is only 3 years old. And trust me, another case will be coming in the next year. If I was a gambling man, I'd say that'd be coming. If I was gambling, if I had money, if I was going to Vegas. Then you say whether or not you agree or disagree with that, that's not the point. The point is rights can come, rights can go. So, with that, Supreme Court, that's what I'm talking about. But anyways, legal rights. And so, whites had a little bit of rights. Now, rights, at first it was kind of done just basically to divide. So, people in the underclass are divided. Slaves are going to be different now than indentured servants or former indentured servants. There's a separation. They drove a wedge through it. But pretty soon, the law became normal, accepted. People got used to it. They forgot why they happened, these slave codes. And it soon became, they're always there. We've always had these laws. We've always had fornication laws. And pretty soon became, why do we have more rights? What about we as Europeans have more rights than African slaves or American Indian slaves? And more became color of skin. There must be something about the color of skin that makes people better. They're better because they get these rights. They don't have slave codes to punish them and control them. Another one is militia. Militia is a really big part of the slave codes, but we'll come back to that one. And so, you can see where racism is going to come out of this. Racism comes directly from things like the fornication laws, but especially the slave codes. Now, did I define racism yesterday? So let's do it. Because if I say racism, we all know what it is, but we don't really know what it is. Because racism is more than just simply prejudice. It is not just one group looks down on another group. They don't like or trust them because they look different, color of skin, and for prejudice could be religious belief, any number of things. It's much more than that. And that's why it's so difficult to stop. Its tentacles go everywhere. You can't stop racism by just saying, why don't you just accept other people? No, because it doesn't work that way. Racism is literally using the powers of the state and culture. So we're talking about laws. So creating laws and social norms, economics. So who has money? Who can participate in the marketplace and who can't? And that's a big deal. If you don't let somebody of one race participate in the markets, like whether it be buy or sell goods, or for that matter, go into a restaurant with other people, you're just basically saying, you're a second-class citizen for the rest of your life. Nothing you can do about it. You're done. That's why these are big deals. But basically, these kind of, how your state will help create the whole culture to put one race over another. So it's more than just prejudice. Prejudice. I would argue this is where my bias comes through. I think it's usually ignorant, and it's almost always based upon fear. But this is much more insidious. And once these slave codes were very effective, every other colony did it, and the same attitude would be used to justify colonization all over the world. And boy, isn't that nice when you come up with an idea, kind of begin to develop that people of European descent are superior? Boy, if you're of European descent, you think, yeah, that's pretty cool. I must be great. It's easy to like a philosophy if it says you're a good person and you're better than others. In fact, it's kind of seductive, isn't it? You think about it. You're better than them. You're right, I am better. Because we all want to be better, right? Yeah, we're all looking like, yeah. No, actually, it's pretty scary, isn't it? Okay, to me, it's really scary. Another bias of mine. And why? Why? Why do this? They weren't sitting there in the House of Burgesses and saying, hey, that's great racism. That'll be fun. Yeah. Wait till 1990. Let's see if it's still going, or even, I don't know why I said 1990. I was going to say 2018. It came out in 1990.
I don't know. 9 is half of it.
I was alive. What's that? See, to me, that doesn't seem that long ago. I know, isn't that weird? When you get older, it's amazing how Like 1990, that wasn't that long ago. Jeez, that's 28 years ago. What the heck? You think weekends go fast? All right, so. Okay, I can do it. All right, so what this is, the key element is, it's power. And everybody write down power. Ah! You know, I used to be able to, I mean, I would bounce these pins right out that locker and right in Mr. Larson's room. I mean, I was so good at it.
Do it again.
Not a circus act. This is science.
Or just like go with.
And if you get one of those Super Bowls, you can do it really carefully. Go off that locker, off the other locker, right into Mr. Mahalish's room. But probably you gotta be careful with that. Huh?
Mr. Mahalish is scary.
Yeah, well, sure. But, and the best part is when somebody's walking down the hall and all of a sudden the pin flies by them. All right, so. But I didn't want to do it. Mr. Larson as a student teacher. Being a student teacher is fun. So I don't want to. All of a sudden a pin comes rolling into the student teacher like, no!
Holy crap.
All right, so with that. Oh, Mr. Mahalish, okay. All right, so the thing is power. And this is used to say in power. Think about those on top. If you're on top, you want to stay on top. One of the best ways to do it is make sure that everybody underneath you is fighting amongst themselves. Especially if they're fighting about something like color of skin. So they're fighting amongst themselves and you're on top. Everything's saying, all right, good. Maybe you might throw a little gasoline into the fire and step back and watch. I'm only being slightly facetious. That's really what happens. Divide and conquer. So they split up whites and blacks. That's what they did. And it's all power. And power is politics. That's what politics are. So we're talking politics. This is a political function. Who has power? Who has power? Who controls things? Who knows what's going on? That is what racism is about. Power. Power. Who has power? Think about poor whites down in Virginia after Bacon's Rebellion. So give it a few years, down the road, going into the 18th century, 1740, 1750. They don't have much, do they? They're pretty poor, they have either bad land or they're working for, don't think in terms of wages today, because it's pre-capitalism, but working for very little on a plantation. They don't have much. But what's the one thing they've got?
Rights.
Why?
Because they're white. Yes, they're white.
I got that one little thing. I don't have much power, but the one little bit of power I have is that I'm better than them.
Oh my gosh, that's rude. I'm sorry.
What?
That's rude. I'm sorry.
That's
Rude.
Rude. Your world.
Still rude. Yeah.
But think about how scary that is. That's Bacon's Rebellion thinking. During the Civil War, the vast majority of soldiers that fought for the Confederacy did not have slaves and never would have slaves. Yet they fought like hell to make sure those people kept their slaves. Why? I don't have much. But if we get rid of slavery, now I'll be equal to them. I want to keep my little tiny bit of power.
Oh, so they got angry. They got angry and competitive.
Yeah. Well, the way this looks at it is too, there's only so much power in the world. And the idea is if I lose power, or if they get power, I lose power. Can you define power that way? Do you have a bucket of power at home?
Yeah.
It's much more complex than that. There's my cauldron of power. Look at it. I can't give you any. I have all the power. What? Don't touch it. It's mine. This attitude is that it's a zero-sum game. Have you ever heard that before, zero-sum? That there's a finite amount. If you lose a little, or if someone gains some, you have to lose some. If I lose it, they gain it. So we're always fighting for it. It doesn't work that way. It's much more complex, but that's the way people look at it. I mean, so much of the fight in the Civil Rights Movement was, well, does anyone know what happened at Little Rock Central High in 1957? Yeah.
Is that the Little Rock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like I think 9 African American students just integrated into the all-white high school.
Yeah, it was a first of the high schools in the former Confederacy, and they only allowed just a few in. And when the school board of Little Rock did it by court order, they wanted it to fail. They did not want integration to work. And so what they did is they picked a working class district, so pretty poor people, like most just barely working, because they knew the people there, the whites, would react with a fury. I don't have much, and now you're even taking that little bit of what I have away.
I'd be angry too.
So much of the argument against the women's rights movement. Men are going to lose that little bit of power they have. Especially, most people don't have much, but I can have it over my wife or whatever it could be. I'm just telling you. I mean, a little bit harsh on that, but that's the reality. And we see this power dynamic all the time. And by the way, that should tell you something about history. I look at this, and I mentioned this about slave codes and fornication. So, yeah, that's way back in 1700. Haven't changed. We're still people. We still have the same dynamic. We still want to hold on to what we got. And time after time, this happens. Most people don't know. And so they kind of go into a blind mode. Which, by the way, if you were in charge and want to change something, wouldn't it be in your best interest for people not to know that something like this had happened in the past? So you can act like, heck, you can invent your own history. It was a great success. As I like to say, to get involved in a land war in Asia, no problem. Never a problem. Let's do it. We're fine in Korea, no problem. Vietnam, no sweat. Let's invade Iraq. That was in your lifetime. Because people don't do it, but they didn't know. So this is a big deal right here. And so we have created racism. And I call it, and I stole this from somebody else, but it's Bacon's Rebellion like thinking. That's why Bacon's Rebellion is such a big deal. That's why it's such a big deal. I'm not going to, there's other rebellions, but Bacon's Rebellion is the biggie. And what we're coming to, though, is this strange squiggly line. And you need to know that. I forgot what I was going to write. What we're going to talk about, though, is all of this is because we are developing or having economic development of these colonies. Racism, slavery, plantations, all of that was economics. Now, when I say economics, all of you probably think, oh yeah, economics. Can you define it? It's not business. Business is not economics. People think, oh yeah, economics is business. No, that's not. Economics is different.
Community?
Hmm?
Is it like community?
Say it again.
Like community?
Community's involved, but it's about how community deals with certain things. Specifically, economics is, so it's in a way, how do we as a society, a people, a culture, a government, deal with scarce commodities? Scarce commodities. What's a scarce, well, first off, what's a commodity?
Fruit?
Any good you sell. Any good you sell. Any good you sell. Anything you sell. I'll give you an example.
Paper.
Huh? Paper would be, there's a paper market. Wheat, maize, frozen concentrated orange juice, gold, they're all commodities. Slaves, commodities, buy and sell. They're scarce. There is a limited amount of food, fuel, shelter, whatever it might be. And so how does a community, a society, how do they allocate those? And the thing about this, what happens? Somebody gets lost, and then they try to sell it, and they people. Maybe they sell it, and somebody buys it, and that process of seller and buyer coming together is called a market. That's economics. And it was then a philosophy, and it's really misunderstood because people always think it's just business. No. Business is an element, but we're dealing with these items. So, economic development. Remember, countries got colonies because they wanted gold. Now, when they got there, they found out there weren't mountains of gold. They could just ship in the barrels and send back home. That's when they had to find another way to make money off of this. They want money, just like the plantation owners who did this wanted their money. Now, what we're going to come up with is an economic system, the first real one since the Romans. I know you're all thinking, what about the Romans? Sorry, we got to move on. Who wants to talk about the Romans? Really? Okay, Romans. I miss teaching Western Civ. The Romans are fun. But what we come up with is the first economic system called mercantilism. Now, this is a, can you see it? That's an S, that's an R. For me, that's how I make N's. Does that look like a U? Okay, just shut your eyes and imagine the letter N. Now open them, and guess what? It's an N. The power of positive thinking. So, that does look like Mercantilism. But mercantilism. Mercantile is another term for business transactions. So this is this is basically government policy, which government has so much control over the market. Remember, makes the money. Mercantilism is a broad, it's called macroeconomics. If you look at just one market, like just people buying and selling cars, that's micro, just one market. Macro, the whole thing. So if you see someone's an economist, they're almost always, they're not just an economist, they're focused on macro, focused on micro. I have a minor in economics and mine was macro. I had micro board. Other people like it. My brother is an economist, and his is macro. So, mercantilism. And what it is this policy to, okay, accumulate as much gold as possible. Get gold. And they believe it is a zero-sum game. This operates under the idea that there's only so much gold in the world and we have to get it all. And if we get gold, that means someone will lose it. So it's competition for a finite amount of gold. And this was one of the few things, gold was, that everybody accepted as valuable for whatever weird reason. Gold. A little bit silver, but silver was based upon gold. And eventually this would become a very complex economic system in the 19th century called the gold standard. And the US would go off a bit in 1933 and again in 1971. It's actually really unstable, but it sounds stable because you gold. If you're not going to find colonies with mountains of gold, mercantilism said this. What we're going to do is this. Trade. And trade means maximize. Okay, with trade, you have imports or exports. If you want as much gold as possible, you want to export more goods or import? Export. Exports are goods you sell, your merchants sell overseas. So you sell a good that they want, and what do they give in return? Gold. You want what's called a trade surplus, more exports than imports. If you have a trade deficit, it's more imports than exports. That means more of your wealth is leaving to buy other goods. What's the United States today? Do we have a deficit or a surplus in trade? We have a massive trade deficit, and it's getting significantly larger over the last year. When I was your age, it was still a surplus. That was the last time it was a surplus, 1921. And so with that, clean living. Oh, yeah. So with that, and so the thing is, you have to do this, you get gold. And what you do it two main ways they do it. And colonies fit in with this. First off, you put tariffs on. Tariffs are a tax on what? You know? Huh? Yeah, tax on imports. Which is kind of a big deal. The way American trade law is right now, the president has the power to place tariffs. And President Trump is very mercantilistic. He sees the world very much in this way. And so he has put tariffs on goods from all over. We're starting trade wars with everybody. Yeah.
Never mind. Sorry.
What?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, some of the farmers in Montana are upset because what happened is we put tariffs on goods from, let's say, Canada, Mexico, Japan, China, all of Europe. Canadians are our mortal enemies, aren't they? Well, we started a trade war, and what did they do in return? Okay, we're going to have to put a tax on their goods. What did they do? Yeah, and so there's a trade war started. And if it lasts a while, prices of goods will do what? What are prices going to do? Dramatically. So you have to start paying more for things. But President Trump thinks very much mercantilistic, that there's only a finite amount of gold, and if there's a surplus or there's a deficit, we got to get the money. It's actually arguably more complex than that, but that's what's happening now. Tariff. And the idea of these tariffs is they call it protective. We're going to protect American or British, whatever it might be, manufacturing from foreign competition. Another kind of tax is called an excise tax. An excise tax is just, it's a tax they add directly to any commodity. So let's say an American planter in Virginia, we just go Virginia now. They want to sell their tobacco, it's still in the empire, they'll have to pay a 5% tax on the value. And that way Britain makes sure they get money. That's why they would do it there. It acts very much like a sales tax. You know what a sales tax is? We don't have a blanket sales tax. We have some things like a sales tax. Like we pay about, what, 70 cents a gallon tax on gas. There's tax on hotel rooms, cigarettes, liquor, you know, things like that. But you go to most states of the union, there's a tax on almost everything. And go to a place like Seattle, it's shocking how big the tax is. I think, what is it? Like 8.5 for the state, and then like 6 for the city? That's a lot. That's a big tax. We'll talk more about sales taxes. They're designed to tax what group of people? Poor and middle class. Gouge the poor, tax the middle class, help the rich. Yeah. That's what they're designed to do. So, this is it. How did Britain do this? Britain did it this way. So remember, they got these colonies. And they started when they only had about 7 colonies. Oh, did I forget something? I forgot something. Sorry. Don't get mad at me. I'm old and befuddled. Remember, I've been doing this since 1928. Depression was tough, people. And then the war. Disco. So, with that, before we get to that, colonies fit in this way. Colonies provide raw materials. Think about it. If you have to import raw materials from another country, there goes your gold. But if you have a colony that provides it, the big one at this time, think about lumber. Britain went through a glass revolution in the 16th and 15th century, and they cut down all the trees to make glass. What do you make glass out of? Sand, but you gotta heat it. So they cut down everything. Go to New England, trees everywhere. And so that was huge. And if you have the colony, you can make them sell only to the mother country. And so you don't have to pay as much. So you get cheap raw materials from colonies, and they become a market for your manufactured goods. Then you turn around and sell manufactured goods at a great profit. Manufactured goods. Close enough. And so think about what this is doing. They're going to go to the colonies and suck all the raw materials out and not pay for much. So just suck all the wealth out. So they're already doing it that way. And then they turn around and force them to buy manufactured goods only from the mother country at a great price. So you suck the rest of the money out. Colonies, there's never any money. If you want to see what happens with a colony, I mean, literally what they would do, the business plan for a country with colonies is take a colony, suck everything out, then do what? You're independent and leave. Why do you think Africa's so poor? But to give you an example, it's right here in this state. It's almost like what happens to colonies. Go to Butte. They sucked every bit of wealth out of there. And what did they leave? A big pit that would soon pollute the entire water supply. It used to have 120,000 people. Butte did. Now it's a big ghost town. Think the money they sucked out of that mountain stayed in Butte? No, they took it all, just sucked it out and left. And the thing is, colonists might have had high hopes, but they quickly realized what was happening. And they made sure that the colonies would not make any of this stuff on their own. Okay, you remember your heady days as a freshman in your world cultures? Remember those days? Weren't those wonderful?
Yes.
Did anyone watch Gandhi?
Yes.
A few people? Pretty good movie, even though it's like 17 days long. And if you don't know Gandhi, India was going through the same thing, mercantilism. And how did Gandhi dress? Suit and tie? And who made his clothes? It was a robe, and who made them? They're homespun. He made it himself. Why? They're British. Britain came in, took all the textile making practices from India, took it back to Britain, and then banned all textile production. So you had to buy everything from Britain. So if anybody's wearing cotton clothes, that method of weaving, that comes from India. This is actually polyester, but I'm more sure underneath that's hot. And if you're wearing like a sweatshirt, that's from calico, Indian. Denim is Indian, from India. And so they were gouging the Indian people. And Gandhi was making a political statement. I'm going to make my own clothes. Violating the law, because I was against the law, as a political stance against British colonialism. That's why he did it. That's politics. It was a major, it was actually a really great political stand. I'm not going to pay your taxes. In the colonies, Britain said you can have no piece of wood, so cut from one trunk over 15 inches wide, because they wanted everything for a ship's mast. And so, if you go to Boston, you go to Paul Revere's home. In the door, they have this big plank in the middle, and it's 15 inches, or it's 15 and 1/2 inches. And that's his, go to hell, Britain. And he's making a political statement. I don't even think it's just a piece of wood. No, it's a big deal. Big deal. And so, what did Britain do here? Britain, this thing's on too. No, you've had your one throw. So what did Britain do? Britain tried to establish mercantilism. By the way, some of you might know the term actually comes from Louis XIV's France. Actually a little bit after this, but Britain did a couple things. In the 1650s, and this was after the king was beheaded, so this is what's called the Commonwealth. In the 1650s, they passed a series of laws that I lump together as the Trade and Navigation Act. Sometimes you just see them as, sorry, the Trade and Navigation Acts. I'm sorry, sometimes you just see them as the Navigation Acts. Trade and Navigation Acts. And what they did is, it's a way to make sure they suck money out of the colonies. There's a few elements, but the two you need to know is, here's that excise tax on various goods. So we'll tax them like tobacco, lumber, whatever it might be. And then here's the biggie. To make sure the tax is collected, but also to restrict trade, what they did is this. Any goods traded out of the colonies, any goods traded out or in, must be on British ships and stop at a British port. So you got to stop at a port and be on a British ship so they make sure they pay the taxes. So even if a planter in Virginia was going to ship their tobacco to France, they got to be on a British ship and they got to stop in, let's say, Portsmouth, and then go to France. And then to make sure there's no competition in the colony, so it only provides raw materials, they passed a series of laws after this. And you could probably guess what they did. The Hat Act, the Iron Act, Ship Act, Molasses Act. By the way, what do you make from molasses? Rum is the big, yeah. Big money. Easier to ship molasses. Can't build hats, don't make that sound, or I'd staple your tongue to your forehead. Iron, ship, molasses. And there are other ones too. So they can't make it. But here's the big thing. Did it work? Colonists ignored them. Britain couldn't enforce them. They passed the laws, but the colonists still did what they wanted. That's part of the reason they could have the House of Burgesses. That's part of the reason why you have all the elements on Bacon's Rebellion. They tried to enforce mercantilism, and I got to get this before the bell rings, so just bear with me, people. We call this time period salutary neglect. Salutary comes, it's the term salutations you might have heard.
Yeah.
Good. What happened was, since Britain couldn't force mercantilism, it was actually good for both the colonial economy because it could develop a more diversified economy, and the trade from that actually enriched British merchants too. Mercantilism is actually very flawed. And so this helped, even though Britain never would have acknowledged it at the time. Historians called it that 300 years after. So it's not like they're calling it at the time. And 3 reasons why. Number 1, distance. Number 2, colonists just ignored it. They're like, yeah, we know there's a law, but we don't care. I didn't come here to pay taxes. And number 3, Britain was at constant war. If you're at war, it's hard to collect taxes, but also they want to make sure the colonists help, because the biggest enemy of the British were whom? Who was the biggest enemy of the British for this whole time period? And they still don't like each other very much. Who? And all this area here is New France. And so the colonists will have to fight French. They're militia. They need this. All this is New France. You're sitting on an area that was claimed as part of New France. Did it mention the U.S. would buy it? Louisiana purchase. Got it. I am so happy for all of you. Now I get to talk about Vietnam. Special topics we're doing in the Vietnam War. Go into details of the war, the music, what happened. Yeah. Everybody have a good weekend.
I work on weekends.
It's just me. It's gonna be. It's kind of warm. It's just me.
I was sweating when I got here.
I like it cold. I
need to be sports friends.
Chop, people. Let's get out of here. All right, let's learn stuff. Oh yeah. I tried to throw it, but it exploded on the roll. It's good for me though. So somebody missed the quiz yesterday on Vietnam. The make of it you have to draw it. I know. 2 scale. I got to print the map. Oh, we're broadcasting.